Welcome back to the Vaporwave Essential Series, where I break down albums from the Vaporwave scene that I believe are absolutely necessary to include in your library. I'm so excited to get back to this series. I know the last episode was quite a while back. I'm super sorry about that. But today, you and I are going to be dissecting Death's Dynamic Shroud's 84-track behemoth, known as DERELICT Mega Tower. Also, feel free to let me know in the comments below which albums you believe are classic essential listens and deserve a spot in the next episode of the Essential series.
But there's this track on New Dreams Limited that's just straight up a track from the Night soundtrack, just slowed down. And I remember hearing it and just being so pissed off, like, why am I working so hard to make all of these songs from scratch when I could just be, taking the music from the OST and slowing it down or whatever. So my first impression of Vaporwave was very sort of negative, and it made me sort of take this Puritan stance against sampling. And the idea with Derelict Superstructure was that, the totality of music history was this sort of mega tower, and the foundation of which was the human soul or whatever, and sort of every generation adds to their own floor and their own layer of this mega tower. But as we take ideas from the past and recontextualize them or sample them or whatever, that like a Jenga tower, we're taking pieces from the bottom and sort of putting them on the top. And I was just wondering, how tall could we actually build this tower before we start to lose structural integrity and the whole thing just collapses? And what does that actually mean?
Ask any Vaporwave fan out there, and they'll tell you nothing ever really comes close to the experience of listening to Death's Dynamic Shroud, consisting of tech honors James Webster and Keith Rankin, whom many of you may recognize for running Orange Milk Records, as well as the incredible artwork he has done for a handful of artists. The talented trio of Death's Dynamic Shroud provides a diverse opportunity for production, due to the fact that they can mix and match their members to create the exact mood, atmosphere, and or tone they are looking to nail for a project with pinpoint accuracy. Like some trio jumping in and out of the playing field in a Marvel vs. Capcom game, Death's Dynamic Shroud is able to pass their projects to their partners when one of them knows the track they are currently working on may benefit better from the talents of another member. Or maybe they just can't figure out what to do next and inspiration has just run dry. It's an attribute they have that provides a great example of power in numbers. And while Heavy Black Heart is the only actual known album all three of the members worked on at the same time, there is without a doubt these members use one another for advice, criticism, or even just a way to look at a track or project in a new light. Did you know that Tech made World War Olympics solo? Or that Keith Rankin never made a solo album under the Death's Dynamic Shroud moniker? Or how about when James works with Tech, Death's Dynamic Shroud spits out something more emotionally gripping and haunting like Regret? Or on the other hand, when he works with Keith, we get something way more jarring and obnoxious, the screeching yet melodic siren of I'll Try Living Like This. Because of this opportunity to mix and match, Death's Dynamic Shroud will always provide something wonderful for anyone, and it's always fun discussing their discography with other DDS fans and seeing which album is their favorite.
I have loved Death's Dynamic Shroud since before I listened to their music, which sounds weird, but my first experience with Death's Dynamic Shroud was seeing the album art for I'll Try Living Like This. Just the colors, the face that's hidden in the kaleidoscopic textures. That's what I saw, and that was my very first impression of Death's Dynamic Shroud. And it's a piece of art that I would really love to just eat as a fellow visual artist. It is a very delicious looking piece of art, but when I finally started to listen to it, I fell in love with just the sound that is so unique to them. I love how it seems like if they think an idea is good, they find a way to make it work. And that might be overstating it, they might just be naturals at this, but I honestly feel like they have a way of taking a round object and putting it flawlessly through a square hole, and that's crazy to me.
For me personally, I've always been split between 4 albums: Regret, Olympics, I'll Try Living Like This, and Derelict. All 4 completely different from one another, and that is why I don't think I'll ever truly be able to pick one. But today, we are going to be specifically focusing on Derelict Mega Tower. And real quick, if you want to see this topic in written form, you can also head on over to Vapor 95 to check that out, as well as all of the other exciting things they got cooking over there. I'm going to leave a link in the description below.
So Derelict Superstructure was this all guitar-based experimental HCMJ album that was an indictment of sampling inspired by a negative reaction to Vaporwave, basically. But then shortly after that, Tech and I started doing the New World mixtapes just sort of for each other, which was really just harkening back to the video game music mixtapes that I made as a kid. But suddenly Vaporwave was making video game music cool again. And so we were making these mixtapes sort of for each other, passing them back and forth and just sort of enjoying it. And so my stance really changed on sampling and recontextualizing music.
Despite its massive size of 84 tracks and over 4 hours of music, Death's Dynamic Shroud's 2014 release, Derelict Mega Tower, was created solely by one member of the trio, James Webster. Starting as a concept album for HCMJ, another one of James' names to produce music under, the works were eventually compiled into the Derelict album for Death's Dynamic Shroud that we have today. Here, we have the only known production video during this time. According to James, it's probably from an old Instagram post, playback coming off his Tascam 4-track. His 84-track experiment, consisting mostly of old video game samples giving themselves to James for him to control and bend at his will, represents everything Vaporwave is all about in the fullest degree. For most of these tracks, James would focus heavily on the process of recording with tape. Here we have an example of one of his video game rips, specifically from Mystical Ninja 64, a game for the N64, of one of the raw tape dumps used in the process of making the album. The music was recorded onto the 4-track and then played into the computer at a lower real speed. Doing this creates a warm, natural slowing and pitching of the samples as opposed to a digital simulation in a DAW.
I even went back to the original abandoned HCMJ Derelict Superstructure project, because I had sort of abandoned the guitar thing, and then I tried to do it as a synth album, and then I started doing Death's Dynamic Shroud and gave up on it. But some of the tracks from that synth album made it onto the Death's Dynamic Shroud album, but I sort of gave them the same treatment that I did the other samples, where I was running it onto tape and then slowing it down and then feeding it back and then sort of cutting it up and doing all that. So some of that snarkiness and sort of punk rock energy from that original HCMJ concept still exists in Derelict Mega Tower. You know, just its sheer length being a way to say, hey, look how easy it is to make Vaporwave, is one of those ways. And then, you know, there are like the Mystery Science Theater 3000 skits in there, you know, the one where they're making fun of how low effort new age music is and how to do a Yanni chord. All you have to do is hit 2 notes on a keyboard and then you get a record contract from Windham Hill.
The album is simple at its core and represents this notion that you can really do anything in the scene, no matter how serious you take it or not, or no matter how good the project is or not. This is why this album is such a hub world for Vapor fans out there, new and old. It just proves all you gotta do is experiment.
84 tracks, just like the quest that I've never completed in most RPGs, you kind of get lost listening to this album. But luckily, unlike our SNES, you can listen to this album on shuffle and still get a great experience. For me, at the moment, International Team is my favorite song.
And don't get me wrong, the tracks themselves, the success of this album in the scene, would be nothing without the overpowering aesthetic behind it. I envision the tower and the artwork, some floors being more convoluted while others are mere lobbies, a resting point between 2 hectic spots. In a way, I also like to think of the album as having save points. I've never really listened to the album straight through that I can remember. And whenever I revisit it, I usually listen to it in chunks, eventually pausing at a more calm or simple track among its journey. There is an amazing amount of variety between every song, rainy days and sunny days, really pushing this all-encompassing journey as you progress to the top of the Mega Tower.
On Dream Catalog, which is really where I wanted to be at the time, I loved what they were doing and I was a huge fan, and I felt like, well, if I make a 4-hour-long album and just send it to them, you know, they won't be able to say no.
And when actually glancing at the track list on its Bandcamp listing, that first time you happen to stumble upon that webpage and scroll down, witnessing the sheer length of songs perfectly replicates the entire idea of the album in the first place, looking up at the ever so gigantic, intimidating dark tower in the middle of the city. You know at first glance, putting aside whether or not you'll actually like the music or not, no matter what, listening to Derelict is going to be a challenge.
Well, Mega Tower is a good name for this release because it's enormous, clocking in at a whopping 84 tracks. And Death's Dynamic Shroud really lives up to their name, because if there's one way I could describe this album, it is dynamic. The album is in constant flux, floating between sentimental, romantic tones to smoky, almost David Lynchian guitar to dark sci-fi in all just a few tracks. It feels like being taken on a tour of Vaporwave. There's just so much here. I can see influences of Vectroid's New Dreams LTD and the StarCalc era, as well as some are really reminiscent of the Sega Dreamcast. Overall, it's a really excellent primer for anyone looking for a comprehensive overview of the genre.
So whether one perceives James' reasoning for the massive length of the album as unnecessary filler to stretch a narrative or actual concrete beauty building these floors, or a mix of both, the connection between the album's enormous track list and villainous-looking artwork undoubtedly makes you curious about the project altogether.
Because Death's Dynamic Shroud was really just a joke in the beginning about Vaporwave, you know, not necessarily making fun of it, but just sort of, you know, Tech and I had spent almost a decade making original music and original composition, playing in bands and doing all this. So originally, Death's Dynamic Shroud was just sort of like a fun space for us to play around with other people's music. So taking it to its maximum extreme was just something that really appealed to me at the time, and it also just kind of seemed funny.
An album this big and or intriguing easily creates a buzz, and in my opinion, encouraging discussion is one of the most rewarding benefits an artist can achieve when making music. The idea that you can bring people together to discuss it and just have a fun time breaking it down.
I think it has to do a lot with how the internet works, and the fact that people can post this onto YouTube and talk about it. You kind of get a sense of community listening to this album because there's so many tracks. More often than not, someone's asking what music, you know, because they get stuck in their head, what song did this originally come from that was sampled in this specific song, right? So if it's a Final Fantasy track, people are like, I know I've heard this song before. I played it in a video game. Which one was it? And somebody can reply. And in that sense, it becomes almost like a mystery hunt in which people are able to come together as a community and really decide, like, not only is this great music, but it does bring out the childhood past that I once had, and it does bring out how collectively we all did enjoy these songs and these music and the video games all together. I think that's cool about this album, and I think by itself, if the internet didn't exist and it was just thrown on a CD and it was found in a store, it wouldn't have been accepted in the same way, and that's a lot of how Vaporwave works.
If you haven't geared up for the trek yet, I highly recommend finding the time to listen to this thing. This is not an album you have to listen to in one sitting. I actually recommend you treat it like a book, and I think you'll get the best experience that way, revisiting it whenever you're ready to take on the long, arduous task ahead.
I know some of you might be thinking, Porter, how do I listen to an album that's 4 hours long? Do I have to do it in one sitting? Or do I try and listen to it in sessions? If I'm being honest with you, my friend, I've done both. And I say it doesn't really matter. Because I think everybody has a unique experience waiting for them inside the Mega Tower.
Death's Dynamic Shroud is definitely not for everyone in the beginning, but Derelict is a great album to start off with. It's easy to recognize video game samples and clear strategy of a starting line to a finish line which you may never reach for a very, very long time.
Because I really did intend it to be a challenge like that. You know, can you make it to the top with the international team, starting from floor 0 and the base camp, and then making it all the way to the top of the tower where you can be raptured by the machine angel. The story isn't really complete at the end of that album.
Like I said before, let me know in the comments below which albums you would like to see me discuss next time, and make sure you've hit like on this video if you want to see more frequent episodes of the Vaporwave Essential series. Also, if you haven't yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the little bell so you never miss a future release. Would be super happy to have you join the fam. It's free, it's only a beautiful click away. And until next time, much love, your boy, Pad Chennington.